policymakers across the world's advanced economies are assessing the need for spending cuts and tax increases against the risk of triggering a new recession. A look back at history provides insights from those who grappled with similar fiscal challenges in past decades.
A study by a team from the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department analyzes the history of budget deficits and fiscal consolidations over the past 200 years. The study looks back at the historical primary fiscal balances of 55 advanced and emerging economies, going as far back as possible, in some cases to the year 1800. The novelty of the data set is that it can show us how the primary fiscal balance of each country changed over the long course of history.
A country's primary fiscal balance is its government's revenue, less expenditure, but excluding the interest bill on the government's debt. It is the most accurate reflection of the government's fiscal policy decisions. When a country has a primary fiscal deficit, it spends more on things like roads, schools, and defense than it takes in from taxes. The data clearly show the worsening primary fiscal deficits that resulted from the First World War. While the primary balances recovered after the war, the onset of the Great Depression brought on a pronounced increase in the average debt levels of governments worldwide. The Second World War caused a worsening in primary balances that dwarfs even those of the First World War. Debt spiked as a result of the war and Reconstruction. In the 1950s and 60s, a combination of favorable economic conditions and reasonable fiscal prudence brought about a steady decline in government debt levels. In the 1970s, fiscal profligacy prevailed as the rate of economic growth slowed down in the aftermath of the oil price shocks. Debts began to increase as a share of GDP. As worldwide interest rates rose, the 1980s saw the first attempts to restore fiscal prudence. Throughout the 1990s, fiscal surpluses and a significant reduction in public debts were achieved due to broad economic expansion and Maastricht-era consolidations in Europe. The global financial crisis that began in 2008 resulted in the most pronounced and pervasive peacetime worsening of the fiscal accounts in modern history.
To assess the degree of fiscal policy sustainability at each point in time, the study documents the periods of fiscal prudence and fiscal profligacy experienced by the 55 countries in the sample over the past 2 centuries. Each country's unique history is reported in the paper and in the accompanying chart book. The study finds general regularities. Fiscal profligacy often occurs when the rate of long-run economic growth declines unexpectedly. Fiscal prudence tends to improve when governments face increases in the cost of borrowing. Today's fiscal policy responses to the global financial and economic crisis will be viewed as prudent or profligate, depending on whether economic growth returns to its rapid levels experienced prior to the crisis.